On October 23, 1983, France suffered its heaviest military loss since the Algerian War. In Beirut, a truck bomb drove straight toward the Drakkar building where French paratroopers were stationed. Then came the explosion, a terrifying blast, a building reduced to rubble, survivors buried under dust, concrete and fire. That morning, Lebanon became the stage for a message sent to the entire world. Behind the smoke, behind the ruins, behind the shock, one mastermind remained in the shadows for a long time. Iran. If you want to understand how this shadow war reshaped part of the Middle East, subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me in the comments what you think about this conflict. Because today the duel between Tehran and Israel could end up touching your own life directly. The shadows spread as early as 1979. The Islamic Revolution overthrew the Shah of Iran, who had been since the 1950s a discreet but genuine ally of Israel. In Tehran, the new regime severed official ties with Jerusalem, adopted a violently anti-Israeli rhetoric, and turned the Palestinian cause into a central pillar of its regional legitimacy. The Revolutionary Guards, the regime's new ideological and military force, pledged to pursue the struggle against the Jewish state. In stadiums, in the streets, in mosques, entire crowds took up hostile slogans against Israel. Yet a paradox emerged almost immediately. While Iran was locked in war with Saddam Hussein's Iraq, Israel secretly supplied it with weapons, spare parts and ammunition through Operation Seashell. In this region, even sworn enemies sometimes know how to help each other when a common adversary seems more threatening still. In June 1982, a new threshold was crossed. The Israeli army invaded Lebanon to drive out Yasser Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization. Merkava tanks rolled toward Beirut beneath the roar of fighter jets. IDF commanders ordered strikes on Palestinian positions, while southern Lebanon gradually fell under a heavy military grip. Part of the Shiite population, initially relieved by the weakening of the PLO, progressively turned against the Israeli occupation. In the villages, anger rose. Patrols multiplied, checkpoints cut off the roads, homes were searched, harvests were destroyed, and the foreign presence became a little more unbearable with each passing day. It was in this climate that Iran began investing massively in Lebanon. Advisors, funding, and religious figures arrived in the Bekaa Valley, particularly around Baalbek. Preachers called for resistance, while a Shiite militant core gradually took shape with the support of the Pasdaran. Hezbollah did not appear in a single day, but it took form during those years at the crossroads of religious fervor, the Lebanese civil war, and Tehran's regional strategy. Iranian weapons poured in as well: rockets, explosives, assault rifles, and then an increasingly formidable clandestine expertise. The first suicide attacks against Israeli and Western targets left a deep mark. In Tyre, in November 1982, a vehicle packed with explosives destroyed the Israeli military headquarters. The exact death toll was long disputed, but the attack ranks among the most devastating losses suffered by Israel in Lebanon, and a recent Israeli inquiry strengthened the hypothesis of a suicide bombing. For the officers of the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, the trail led clearly to Tehran. The ideological signatures, the supply networks, and the methods all bore the imprint of the Iranian Pasdaran. The year 1983 saw the blows multiply. On the night of October 23rd, 2 trucks loaded with explosives struck the American and French barracks in Beirut simultaneously. 58 French paratroopers were killed beneath the rubble, as were 241 American Marines in their own building. Imad Mughniya, the mastermind behind the network that would become Hezbollah, managed to slip through the Mossad's net. Israel's response came in the form of airstrikes on the Bekaa Valley, raids that leveled training camps and destroyed ammunition depots. Drones swept over the valleys through a sharp smell of kerosene and burning metal, but the clandestine networks held. Buenos Aires, 1992. A bomb tore through the front of the Israeli embassy, 29 dead, dozens of wounded in the smouldering rubble. Then 2 years later, the AMIA Jewish Community Center was targeted. 85 victims perished in the collapse. Argentine investigators pointed to the responsibility of Hezbollah and the Iranian Pasdaran, with funding flowing directly from Tehran. The Mossad intensified its surveillance operations. Tails in Cyprus, wiretaps in Beirut, agents infiltrated into several networks. Ariel Sharon, then a minister, swore before the families of the victims that justice would eventually prevail. The mid-1990s intensified the deadly dance. Hezbollah harassed the security zone Israel maintained in southern Lebanon. Rockets rained down on the Galilee, sirens wailed in Kiryat Shmona, and civilians packed into damp shelters waiting for the whistling to stop. In 1996, the IDF launched Operation Grapes of Wrath to reduce Hezbollah's capacity to fire. Artillery batteries pounded Shiite villages for 16 days. Hundreds of Lebanese, including many civilians, died under the shells. In Tehran, anger rumbled and Khamenei promised fresh deliveries of weapons. The Mossad, for its part, intensified its intelligence operations inside enemy ranks. Double agents planted within the Pasdaran reported attack plans before their execution. Senior figures of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, a direct proxy of Iran, disappeared in Gaza or in other capitals. The first Israeli cyber units began testing offensive tools against Iranian systems. Meanwhile, Tehran accelerated the delivery of increasingly precise missiles, including Fajr 5 rockets, to its regional proxies. And on the horizon of the 2000s, a threat of an entirely different nature emerged: the Iranian nuclear program. IAEA inspectors flagged traces of suspicious enrichment at Natanz, and in Jerusalem, analysts began speaking of an existential threat. In May 2000, Israel unilaterally withdrew from southern Lebanon under the accumulated pressure of Hezbollah. Shiite crowds rejoiced in Beirut, yellow flags flew over abandoned positions, and Prime Minister Ehud Barak paid the political price for the decision. For Tehran, the Israeli withdrawal was a major strategic victory, living proof that the armed proxy doctrine could force a regular army to bend. But the victory carried a bitter consequence. Hezbollah emerged from that period more structured, better armed and more deeply embedded than ever in the Lebanese political fabric, while in Tel Aviv, the files devoted to the Iranian nuclear program piled up on the Mossad's desks. The phantom war continued to thicken. An Iranian scientist headed home in Tehran. A motorcycle parked by the roadside was waiting. A remote-controlled machine gun spat death. The body collapsed onto the still warm afternoon asphalt. Who pulled the trigger? The shadow answered with silence. The tension peaked when a Pasdaran convoy exploded in Syria. The trail led to Israeli commandos, and in Tehran once again total vengeance was sworn. The dusty road seemed empty. Then everything flipped. In November 2020, a few kilometers from Absard, east of Tehran, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was traveling in a discreet convoy. A few seconds were all it took. Gunfire tore through his vehicle, his guards cried out, and the researcher whom the Islamic Republic considered the presumed father of its military nuclear program collapsed onto the frozen asphalt of an autumn afternoon. The message was unbearable for the regime. Even in the heart of the national territory, inside a secured convoy, the enemy could strike. But to understand that scene, one must go back to the summer of 2006, when another battle radically changed the nature of the war. Southern Lebanon was burning. Hezbollah captured 2 Israeli soldiers at the northern border, triggering an immediate and massive response. Fighter jets tore through the sky over Beirut, bridges collapsed into dust, and the roads of the south were littered with burned-out vehicles. But on the other side, the Shiite fighters did not give way. They emerged from underground bunkers, fired, melted into the rubble, and reappeared elsewhere. For 34 days, Tehran observed, armed, financed, and advised from a distance. For Iranian strategists, the lesson was invaluable. An ideologically solid, well-equipped militia could resist a modern regular army and even force it into a stalemate. In the shelters of northern Israel, the sirens never stopped wailing. Entire families held their children against damp walls, while rockets fell on Haifa and the Galilee. In Tehran, meanwhile, Revolutionary Guard officers studied the front maps with cold attention, noted the interception delays of Israeli systems, and measured every detected weakness. a doctrine took shape with methodical brutality. Gradually encircle Israel through a network of armed proxies from Lebanon to Gaza, through Syria and Iraq, and wear the adversary down in a war of attrition while never offering a single clear military target. Meanwhile, another front proved even more dangerous. The names of Natanz, Fordo, and Arak entered every Western and Israeli strategic briefing. The Iranian nuclear program, long opaque, began to seriously worry Israel from the late 1990s onward, then imposed itself as the absolute priority throughout the 2000s and 2010s. Inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency flagged suspicious activities, Western powers imposed increasingly severe economic sanctions, and Israeli leaders repeatedly stated that the prospect of a nuclear Iran represented an existential threat. Behind the official speeches, an underground and technological war grew to a new scale. Industrial sabotage, intelligence infiltrations, targeted assassinations, and soon computer viruses of unprecedented sophistication. Then Stuxnet emerged. In the cold, fluorescent-lit clean rooms of Natanz, Iranian technicians watched their enrichment centrifuges accelerate, slow down, and malfunction in inexplicable ways, while the control screens continued to display normal readings. A piece of malicious code, of a complexity never before seen in the history of cybersecurity, had seized physical control of the machines. The attack was widely attributed to a joint US-Israeli operation by many specialists and investigative journalists, even though neither country ever officially claimed it. The era of offensive cyber warfare had opened. A nuclear facility could now be sabotaged without a single soldier crossing a border. Targeted assassinations of scientists came to complete this strategy. Between 2010 and 2020, several researchers and engineers linked to the Iranian nuclear program were killed in attacks that Tehran systematically attributed to Israel. The scene repeated itself with chilling precision. A motorcycle appeared in the morning traffic, a magnetic charge stuck to a car door, a sharp detonation rang out, then silence. Each operation produced a calculated double effect, concretely slowing down the research and publicly humiliating the regime. Each scientist's funeral, in turn, triggered a wave of national anger, portraits raised in the streets of Tehran, fists in the air, and slogans of vengeance. Syria then became a vital strategic corridor for Iran. After the outbreak of the Syrian civil war in 2011, the Pasdaran reinforced their military presence around Damascus and along several axes linking Iran to Lebanon, with the dual objective of keeping Bashar al-Assad in power and delivering increasingly sophisticated weapons to Hezbollah. Israel responded with hundreds of airstrikes against transfer convoys, ammunition depots, and positions linked to Iranian militias. The sequence repeated itself for years. A pitch-black night over the Syrian desert, a brief whistle, a thunderous impact, a warehouse reduced to ash, shrapnel hurled into the sand. Each bomb aimed to cut the supply routes before they could tighten a stranglehold around Israel's borders. In January 2020, a shock of considerable magnitude struck the Iranian system. Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Quds Force and the principal architect of Iran's entire proxy strategy across the Middle East, was killed in Baghdad by an American drone strike as he left the airport. Israel was not the direct author of that strike, but in Jerusalem, many saw the disappearance of one of the most dangerous and effective strategists the Islamic Republic had ever produced. In Tehran, the funeral processions drew millions of people, a dense human tide beneath the generals' portraits. The regime swore not to deviate by a single inch from its strategic line, but in Soleimani it lost a master operator whose experience and personal networks were irreplaceable. Then came 2023. Hamas's attack against Israel on October 7th and the Israeli military response in Gaza set the entire region ablaze. The Lebanese front activated almost immediately. Hezbollah multiplied its rocket and drone strikes toward northern Israel. The IDF bombed Shiite positions in southern Lebanon, and the hypothesis of a direct confrontation with Iran itself ceased to belong to the realm of theory. In the capitals, diplomats still spoke of restraint and de-escalation. On the ground, each day felt like a door giving way a little more under the accumulated pressure of 40 years of grievance. On April 1st, 2024, a brutal turning point occurred in Damascus. An airstrike attributed to Israel destroyed an annex building of the Iranian consulate and killed several senior Revolutionary Guard officers. For the Islamic Republic, a red line had just been crossed. The Middle East held its breath for days. Then, on the night of April 13th to 14th, Iran crossed its own historic threshold by launching from its own territory the first large-scale direct attack against Israel. More than 300 projectiles were fired, including kamikaze drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles. The sky above the region became an incandescent chessboard. Trails of fire crossed the darkness. Israeli and Allied anti-missile batteries intercepted in a chain, and fireballs flared above the cities and the desert. The material impact remained limited thanks to the effectiveness of Israeli defenses and the active support of Western and regional allies, but the political and psychological shock was considerable. In a single night, 40 years of proxy confrontation shifted into an openly direct phase. The mask slipped. For the first time in decades, the two powers stopped speaking solely through their proxies and intelligence services. In the command centers, officers scrutinized screens saturated with glowing points, while secure phones crackled without interruption. The escalation did not stop there. In September 2024, Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's Secretary General and the living symbol of Shiite resistance for more than 30 years, was killed in a massive Israeli strike on the southern suburbs of Beirut. A Revolutionary Guard general at his side also perished. On October 1st, Tehran retaliated with a fresh salvo of ballistic missiles targeting Israeli military installations. A few weeks later, Israel struck Iranian territory in return. The machinery was now visible to all: assassination, retaliation, counter-retaliation, with each side still claiming to want to avoid all-out war, while every action brought them inexorably closer to the edge. So, what remains after 4 decades of this confrontation? Traumatized cities, broken generations, sabotaged laboratories, militias that became formidable hybrid armies, and intelligence services glorified by their own, cursed by the others. What remains above all is a cold, enduring truth. This war thrived for so long because it advanced in the dark, in nameless ports, the alleys of Beirut, the bunkers of the Bekaa Valley, Syrian warehouses, the underground chambers of Natanz, and the crisis rooms of Tel Aviv. Today, we can begin to see the reality of this war more clearly. But one question remains, as heavy as a siren in the night. With the current situation, are we heading toward a third world war? Will the conflict spread to neighboring countries? Will they too be drawn into the fighting? And what are Russia and China really doing in the face of their weakened Iranian ally? Are they reliable partners, or is each one playing its own game on this chessboard? Tell me what you think in the comments.